Session blood.
Hello, everyone. My name's Nick, and I am here today with a man who needs no introduction, the methodical Matt Rogers, New Zealand national champion, who went 51-3 throughout the season. And so he's here today with me to discuss his dash deck that he went undefeated with at nationals. So why don't we get started? Tell us a little bit about your experience, and then we'll get into it.
Hi. So I'm Matt. A lot of people know me by now. I'm a avid Flesh and Blood player, and have been enjoying playing a bit of Dash and a few other things, and going throughout the season. So for most of the Road to Nationals season, I played Dash, played Warrior in one of the events, but the rest of it was Dash, and then stayed true to her for Nationals itself. And certainly lucky that I did. I finished Nationals 13-0, undefeated finish, and got myself a trophy, which I'm very, very happy about. So yeah, the deck's done very well. And I'm very keen to sit down with all of you today and kind of discuss thought processes, what we came up with in testing, why we chose the deck we did, and kind of how we played it.
Awesome. So let's start with the main deck.
Yep. So we've divided the deck basically into two parts for you. So this here is the main deck here. So I play these cards in every single match. Pretty much these never get boarded out. This is the core of my deck. I think it's 49 cards, and then we've got these other cards here, which are kind of chopped and changed depending on how I want my deck to play out in the matchup, how I want things to go, and what cards I need access to. So I've got these 34 blues, which are kind of the core engine of the deck, keeps everything going, keeps everything consistent. I've got this chamber that I start and play with in every single matchup. Induction chamber's the one I open in every matchup, and then a couple of other chambers to build up to create a good end game, and then a few end line things and things that search my chambers. So for certain matchups, I want to go up to as many as even the full 6 chambers, and other matchups I'll go as low as just these 3. But I'll never go lower than these 3 chambers. So that's 1 in play starting, and then 2 in my deck, which I can search with Spark and get out throughout the game, etc. So this deck will look different to most Flesh and Blood decks out there, because it's very it's not massively focused. It's got a way to be very focused, but it's also got a way to be very focused on what the opponent's doing rather than what you're doing. So it chops and changes a lot between the matchups, and I think that's a big reason that it's so powerful and that it can consistently win.
Awesome. So if you want to get into any specifics that you wanted to talk about, instead of a brief overview, any specific things that you want to talk about the deck?
Well, I think you've got a few questions for me, but I think the main things that people are wanting to understand about this deck is how I approach certain matchups, what my sort of sideboarding roughly looks like, and how I want my games to play out in kind of the given tier 1 matchups that are out there.
All right. Well, if you want to it's a good segue. We can get started to a couple of questions about the deck.
Yeah.
And get your perspective on it.
Yeah, and we can just.
So the first question is, how do you approach the ninja matchup with only 2 sync and 2 fate? And they also want to know your blocking strategies on turns like Kadachi leg tap.
Okay. So the ninja matchup, I'm trying to be mid-range aggressive, but also have a few defense reacts. So for the longest time, we were trying to not play Fate and Sync. There are very few matchups I actually want to play that way. And for the longest time, we were trying to come to a build where we didn't have to play these cards, because, being red, the fact that they, in multiples, they're so awkward. They don't have resources which allow you to kind of move your game plan. That they're very one-dimensional. They only do one thing. You just, if you draw a bunch of them, you just got to block. And that's not how I like the deck to play out. So, but in testing, we did find Ninja to be one of the harder matchups, and something that these cards, Sink and Fate, just help you more than anything else. That they can completely shut down what they're doing. So I find the Ninja matchup to be all right. We do have a lot of equipment blocks, so something that's really, really important in that matchup is having the Iron Rock Gauntlet, so that we've got Iron Rock, Teklo, and Skullcap that all, kind of having 6 or 7 block just on the equipments there, which can kind of combine with any of my block 3 blues or pretty much anything to hopefully stop some of their better turns with, sort of 2 or so cards in an equipment, and then their turns that they're massively setting up for, that they're really trying to push through with 5 cards. That's the times where you need the Sink and Fate. So I found having 4 Sink and Fate is enough to kind of mitigate those situations. So I'm not playing Unmovable in that matchup, and I'm not playing extra Purifiers or Induction Chambers. My core deck is this. I don't play any extra items in the Ninja matchup, and I'm not focusing a lot on the Tome High Octane plan. I've got it in there, so I play High Octane, I play High Speed, so that I have that plan in there for when I need it. And I play 2 Tome, but I'm not massively focused on that plan. I'm sort of trying to play the game how they're, sort of in a reacting to what they're doing. So I'm playing Command and Conquers, which I like to just, if I don't have a single Fate, I like to just have Command in the arsenal. And as soon as they start taking damage from me, so say I start the turn by pitching, charging up a chamber and the weapon, and I shoot them, and I give it go again, and I realize that they're just going to, probably take all of the damage this turn and try to have this really big turn against me. That's where I'll play Command out of the arsenal and effectively force them to block. So yeah, my Ninja game plan is very centric around sort of putting on pressure while having these cards, basically these 7 cards to shut them down. So the reason I feel I don't need more Sinks and Fates is because the commands actually do a very similar job. Yeah.
All right, awesome. That's a great start. So everyone should be happy about that answer. That's great.
Oh, sorry, there was another question which I forgot. So I think asking about how I block in scenarios versus Ninja, specifically, like for example, Kadachi leg tap. So this is quite a hard question to answer, because obviously it's different every, depending on what they have. But when I'm playing against Ninja, and they're pitching in blue and they're coming in with a Kadachi, the things that I'm thinking about are so firstly, whether I block the second Kadachi attack to try to stop mask. So I'm doing that not a massive amount of the time. So the times where I will block the second Kadachi and use up a piece of my equipment to do so, I barely ever will throw a card into a second Kadachi. I've almost never done that. Unless I'm very certain that their arsenal is sort of a reflex or a +1, and I'm thinking I'm going to get comboed this turn, or not so much comboed, but I'm going to get masked this turn, and I absolutely have to stop it. But very seldom will I ever put a card in front of a Kadachi, or I guess if I'm on 1 life, I will. So generally, the way I'm trying to assess what they're doing is if they're coming in with a 5-card hand, so they've got an arsenal, 4 cards, they've pitched a blue, they've attacked with a Kadachi, and they're attacking with another one, and I'm not wanting to block them so much because I've got a high octane that I want to get off next turn. Say I have a tome in my arsenal, I got a high octane in my hand, I'm wanting to have a really big turn myself. Then the main thing is I can probably give up quite a bit of life because I'm going to gain a bunch back with tome, and I'm going to deal a lot more. So I'm going to be kind of up on the life parity situation. But if I'm letting them draw off mask, then they might be able to string something that can be on the upper end of the amount of damage that they can deal. So they might be able to push over to more than what I'm trying to do back. So if I feel that I can equipment block their second Kadachi and they're very unlikely to be able to follow it up with 3 straight things, then that's when I'll equipment block it if I'm planning to not block. Or most of the times when I won't, the one thing I do want to be able to do is block the third attack. So if they're going Kadachi leg tap, I'm definitely wanting to block the leg tap. That, you know, the times when I don't are probably when I have a big turn that I'm about to kill them and they only have 1 or 2 cards and I'm still on, you know, 15 plus life. I can survive a leg tap line. So I'm not afraid to use a sink below on it, and so, you know, if they have the +1, they get the draw, but they're not doing a massive amount of damage. But it really comes down to their arsenal and how many cards they've got to work with. So if I'm at a situation where I'm pretty sure that they have the +1 in the arsenal, then I'm likely to just block 2 cards on the leg tap. If I'm not, then I generally am not playing around the +1 a massive amount unless I'm ahead. So if I'm behind, I'm very rarely playing around it. If that, you know, unless we're at a situation where we're, you know, sort of halfway through the game and they've played very few of them, and I know that the deck's kind of chopped up with them and I'm gonna get hit by it. So yeah, it is very situational, but generally that's how I approach that sort of attack.
All right, next question. What's your sideboard plan? Because a lot of people have issues sideboarding and knowing what cards are correct in each matchup. What's your sideboard plan and why do you play those cards in those matchups?
Okay, so you want a full sort of, okay, I'll try to give you
just something quick.
Okay, I'm definitely not good with quick. But basically how I want to approach it is I either want to be the aggressor in the matchup, or I want, you know, I have a mid-range deck where I can kind of pivot how I want to play during a matchup. So if I want to be aggressive more often than not, I'm generally going to play high octanes, tomes, high speed impacts, etc. If they're a setup deck, I'm going to want command and conquer, so I can come in whenever they're trying to set up a 5-card turn to kind of get me. And if they're a deck that can destroy my chambers, for example, Brute, I just play 6 chambers. That's how I get around that matchup. And the defense reactions are only for a few specific things. So against Warrior, my deck completely transforms to a very sort of controlling, you know, sort of I want to be shutting them down with unmovables and just gradually chipping away at them and building up my chambers throughout the game. So, for example, in the Warrior matchup, I'm going to play all of these defense reactions, and my plan is basically to try to get, and you know, to kind of chip away, get my chambers and stuff out as we go, and try to get one of these into the arsenal to shut them down one turn, to do a big kind of shutdown, which will, you know, kind of slowly edge me ahead. So I'm not playing any high octanes in the Warrior matchup. I'm not playing tomes. I'm not playing high speed impact. Yeah, so I'm playing just the 2 chambers and the 2 plasmas, and a bunch of defense reactions and a whole lot of blue cards. So I think I end up having to play 1 high speed just because of how the numbers work. But yeah, basically I'm playing these, maybe 1 high speed, and then these cards here, and I'm boarding out all of the super aggressive stuff because my plan is more to just go long with them, go late, and I should have enough defense to kind of block up all of their big turns while consistently dealing them damage with the inductions and the chambers. So for the matchups like the mirror and yeah, things that I have to be a lot more, you know, things that I can't just sit around and you know, let them do whatever they want to do and shut them down with unmovable. If I can't use unmovable to just shut them down, I want to try to be doing more powerful things than they are. So in those matchups, I'll be playing tomes, high octanes, high speed impacts, and you know, some higher number of chambers and purifiers. Not all 6, but usually 4 or 5. And I'll just be got to go fast, just trying to stay ahead and using Tome High Octane combo to kind of give me an extra life buffer throughout the game so that I can race them.
All right, awesome. Next question is, a lot of people are liking Sigil of Solace even now. Why do you choose not to play it?
So Sigil doesn't really do anything that I'm trying to do. So I've got different ways that I want to play in each matchup. And the only matchup I could even think of where Sigil might help in any of those strategies is probably Warrior. But even then, my life total I'm sort of just using as a resource. So Sigil certainly doesn't do enough. But specifically for Dash, you want to very much limit the amount of generic cards that you're playing, because there are turns, especially in the early and in the late game, where you have an abundance of resources, and so you're wanting to boost with your lower with even your blue cards, and if they can get through hitting a non-generic, it just allows you to deal more damage, allows you to put them into more spots where they have to start blocking, and it's once they start blocking where you really are able to pull ahead. So Sigil just doesn't really help with the game plans. It was very good in the old format because it was a great filler card that just helped you to bide a little bit of time to forward what you were trying to do. But in the formats now, and with most of the decks now, I can't think of very many decks where I'd play Sigil, just because we got access to a bunch more cards that kind of go together to help your plan come through. You need to be in this game, you really need to be playing to win the game. You really need to be figuring out how you're going to kill your opponent and what you're working towards. And so a lot of the cards kind of combo together to get to that outcome. And Sigil is just not something that kind of synergizes with anything.
All right, cool. How did you find the Wizard matchup with such low arcane barrier, and was Visiatronic close to making the cut?
Yeah, so the Wizard matchup, quite hard. And obviously with Visiatronic, it gets a lot easier. But we had a very specific plan for Wizard. So plan A was don't play against it, because honestly, I felt like very few people had figured that deck out. And there was so much hate out there in all of the other classes, specifically from Brute, from Bravo. There's and the fact that Dash got Visiatronic as well. These classes got nowhere in two equipments to completely hate you out. So I did think the representation of Wizard would be low. So it certainly was a matchup I was prepared to give up in the Swiss if it came to that, but I still had a plan that I felt was decent enough. So the plan versus Wizard was basically to take damage from them in the early game, setting up my chambers and basically never shooting them, never attacking them, never trying to deal any damage whatsoever, and get to a point where they're still on 30 life and I'm just below 30 life, which turns on my Skullcap. So at that point, my plan is to use Skullcap and Accelerator to have Null Room 4, and basically just play chambers when I draw them, and the rest of the time just be blocking all of their damage and keeping all my chambers charged up, eventually getting to this point in the game where I have all of these chambers in play, or I have 3 plasmas in play, and I can pull off a high octane turn that just allows me to come at them for about 30 damage and hopefully end the game within a couple of turns of that. So we tested that strategy, understood that it wasn't perfect, but it was certainly a lot better than having to give up a card to play Visiatronic, because the only card I was willing to give up was one of these Fates or Sinks, and I felt too far behind in the Ninja matchup without all 4 of them, that I was prepared to give up some in the Wizard matchup. But certainly if your metagame has a lot more Wizard and a lot more people that have figured the deck out, and you think that you're going to have to beat that deck to win the tournament, then you should play Visiatronic.
All right, awesome. What's your strategy versus Brute? Because of course they have Arc Smash, which is known as the heavy counter to Dash.
Yeah, so definitely don't agree that it's a heavy counter to dash. It can trip you up a little bit. It can be a bit annoying to play against. The way I like to play against Brute is to just play all 6 of these all 6 of these items and say, hey, if you're going to smash a few, I've got more. I play quite an aggressive build. So at most, I'll play 2 defense reactions, and that's only versus specific things. But most of the time, my main game plan is to just be playing items throughout the game, shooting them here and there, get to a point in the game where I've got a few purifiers out, and I bang a high octane into my arsenal, and then carry on through the game. We're going quite long because they're on a smash plan. Get to a point throughout the game. Get to a point in the game where I draw my second high octane, and then I just do one turn with these all charged up, because throughout the game, my game plan is to end each turn with a lot of my items charged up. And generally, Brute decks, or the people that were playing Brute at the time, were targeting chambers. So would leave me with the purifiers in place. So my plan was basically to get to a point where I have high octane in the arsenal, wait until I draw the second one, do a double high octane turn, and then just go absolutely crazy at them with purifiers, and put them in a spot where they can probably never cast an Arc Smash again because they haven't a block from then on out. So I've got the Gambler's Gloves in my sideboard here, which I play against them to try to stop the early smashes, or basically the biggest smashes that are hitting 2+ items. So hoping I can re-roll them and get them to a point where they're only hitting 1 item at a time. But yeah, that's pretty much the game plan.
Cool. Was the high amount of unmovables because you were scared of Bravo?
No. So Bravo's traditionally a pretty good matchup for the deck. The high amount of unmovables were necessary for the game plan that I was having for Warrior. So my game plan for Warrior, as I was saying before, was basically to strip things back, not play any of these sort of high octane tome sort of fast plan, and become this control deck that just tried to block Warrior throughout the game while chipping away at them, and then setting up my chambers to turn the tide at some point, and then just start shooting them for up to sort of 12 a turn. Right. That's so high. Unmovable is just very important at locking them down to be able to turn the tides there.
All right.
Obviously, I guess I should touch. They are obviously very good against Bravo as well. Being able, a lot of the time when Bravo sets up these big crippling crush turns or these big spinal turns or whatever, they're taking a bit of damage to do it. So my absolute best game plan is to be shooting them taking 6 or so to set up this big turn, come in at me with this massive crippling crush, and then I just shut it down with an unmovable. That's absolutely how I want to play that matchup and how I want it to play out every time.
All right, cool. There's no Tunic in the deck, and people seem to think that card is a staple of the game. Why do you choose not to play it?
So Tunic so it was in the deck for a lot of the Road to Nationals season when I was playing this, just because I didn't like Teklo Foundry Heart in the mirror, and in a few matchups, it sort of fatigues me or can put me in situations where I run out of gas. Purifier completely fixed that. You do not run out of gas in this deck pretty much ever. And so it got to the point where Tunic wasn't really doing anything for me. Teklo Foundry Heart allows me to kind of create my own unmovable whenever I need to. So situations where, a big crush is coming in or a command and conquer is coming in, I've got the fact that Teklo Heart blocks 2 and then another 1 whenever I want it to throughout the game just allows me to stop these big turns that people, the way this deck loses is if somebody else manages to get off a really big turn against me. So this is a mid-range deck that's not killing people really quickly. It's sort of setting up throughout the game. So the best way to target a deck like this is to set up big turns to go over the top. And Teklo Foundry Heart in almost every matchup allowed me to stop that from happening. Whereas Tunic just doesn't do anything for that matchup.
All right, cool.
Those situations.
Why is there 3 chamber and 3 plasma purifier in your deck? I see a lot of people not playing 3 of the purifier.
Yeah, so I don't play 3 purifier in hardly any matchups. Seeing the six in my deck doesn't mean that every matchup I just go playing chamber purifier and set all that up. That's not how the deck plays out. It's very important to have 6 in the list specifically for against Arg Smash and for the game plan that I explained before for that matchup. So that's the reason to play 6.
Cool. Why do you play Iron Rock Gauntlet over another red defense reaction?
That's a pretty good question, actually. So mainly that I felt that so the red defense reacts can get a little bit too awkward if I draw too many of them at the same time, because they don't let me they don't allow me to kind of play the game that I want to, or they very specifically force me into a certain game plan. And then they're also very awkward when I don't draw any of them. So Iron Rock Gauntlet kind of fills the slot there, in that if I'm not drawing a defense react, I can still kind of make my own on a really important turn, and then if I am drawing them, then I can use them to shut those turns down. So it's mainly for Ninja, and so it is the same sort of matchup that the 5th red defense react would be used for. So it is a really good question in that respect, but I felt a bit more comfortable knowing that if I was in a situation where I wasn't drawing any of the red defense reacts, well, I've started with one and play it effectively, so I can shut down a turn when I need to.
All right.
Also,
so that's all the
Iron
questions.
Gauntlet was really unnecessary in that matchup because it's not how it plays out. I'm not really, it's good with Command and Conquer, but Command and Conquer is good by itself anyway because they have so many block 2s. I don't necessarily need it to be 8 power.
All right, awesome. So that was great deck tech. I hope everyone learned a thing or two about it. So now's the time where we're going to talk about what Matt has learned during his time from the start of the game till now that people might want to know. And I'll be now talking and assisting as his testing partner. We've both learned things at the same time. So if you're only here for the deck tech, you can leave now. That's cool. I hope you've learned a thing or two about Dash. But if you want to learn more about the game and all that kind of stuff, then stick around.
And how to beat Dash.
Yeah, we're going to tell you how to beat Dash. So we'll get started. So looking at your deck and looking at other people's decks, I'll ask you this question. The blues that people play in their deck, do you have any specific reason why you run specific blues? Because I see people just playing blues because they're resource cards for the most part, but
yeah, so I guess the most important thing I can say about blues and about why to play certain blues in your deck, the biggest thing that you need to do, I think, when deck building and when making a decision about what blues you play is consider your sideboarding. So the biggest mistake that I see people make with blues is they play all these blues that are like good in some matchups and not so good in others. So they end up boarding them out in half the matchups, which effectively make them a sideboard card. So in this game, you need to really think about your sideboard cards, about which cards you're not playing in every single matchup. So there's the core of your deck that you play in every single matchup, and then there's the sideboard, the things that you put in to make certain matchups better or to have a different plan for certain matchups. Now, what blues to me, similar to Magic, are kind of your land cards, your resource cards. And for those that play Magic, you'll know that generally you don't play very many lands on your sideboard. It's sort of one, at most, and that's even very niche. So more for matchups where you specifically want more resources. Whereas I see a lot of people just chucking a whole lot of blues in their deck that they like and boarding out a bunch in matchups that they're not good. So when you're boarding out certain blues like Teklo Core, for example, in matchups like Brute and Ninja and Warrior that you need to be blocking, then you're really only playing Teklo Core in specific matchups. So Dash, Bravo, and instead of playing those blues, what you could just be playing is cards that are just better for those matchups, like sideboard cards that are specifically designed to take that matchup, to play a certain way in that matchup. So I think that was one of our biggest realizations in testing with Teklo Core, and the reason that we only played one is because we were boarding it out in so many matchups that it was a sideboard card, and that there were just better sideboard cards for those matchups. So yeah, there was just no point in playing and playing that card as a resource card that's also a sideboard card.
Yeah, it's also kind of, you have to know the role of every card in your deck.
Yeah.
So if you're playing a dash deck, your first blues should always be cards that boost, because that's how you get off your Octane and your Tome of Final turns. That is your bread and butter combo. And then the rest should just be, okay, I don't have enough boost cards, so I'm going to play Overblast and Pour the Mold, which don't really do anything, but they just
they're just blue block threes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You need more blues to be able to
best blues,
resources you want. Yeah.
Yeah. The best blues are the ones that they're good draws and they're good resources, so they have that utility in your deck. But yeah.
Yeah, so I sort of, in the deck tech video just before, I sort of separated my blues as well. So you would have seen the blues in one pile that are useful for the plan, and then the blues in the other pile that pretty much are just in there to be blue block threes.
Yeah, definitely.
So even 2-cost boosting blues are great because there are a lot of matchups and there are a lot of games where your plan becomes, okay, in order to win this game, I actually need to have one big double Octane turn, or I need to get an Octane and Tome off. And I don't care how I get that off. It doesn't really matter if I have to pay an extra resource because I'm playing a 2-boost blue thing and I'm only attacking them for 2 or whatever. If it gets it off and it means I'm drawing extra cards and getting extra action points, it's worth a lot more anyway. It doesn't matter that it attacks for 2. Yeah,
for sure. Another thing we wanted to discuss. You can also bring stuff up that you're thinking about. This is just a kind of a rant, essentially, that we'll just go into, and we're just free rolling. We're just improvising. We're just coming up with things. So cards that people think are good against decks, but they're really not good. And so I have this card, which is Iron Determination, and this is like the bait card that we found in Warrior, where people just they play their dream scenario of going Determination, Supremacy kind of turns, and
with the opponent not having a defense react to them just winning.
So in itself, using a card to get +1 isn't very efficient, right? It does not doing much. And people say, oh yeah, but it has Dominate. So if you're playing at a higher level, your opponent's going to play around your Iron Song Determination and just keep their cards in their arsenal. And so the Dominate barely is relevant. So that's how people lose to decks like Dash, because they play their dream scenario of getting to a Determination and your opponent has 5 unmovables in their deck, and then you just get nothing out of it.
Card. I mean, the finals of Nationals, there was a turn where John cast a Determination, and then he pitched another Determination, so he was only getting 2 off his resource card that turn as well. I had an unmovable, and I just felt like I was so many cards up, or so many kind of data points up in that scenario. And I see that over and over again with Warrior players.
Yeah. Is there any cards that you think are a trap at all in deck building from other decks that you've seen, or other cards that maybe you can think of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few, and Lightning Strike sort of comes to mind as well. That's another card that everybody's like, well, this was so powerful in set 1, so it's just an auto include in every single deck. But I continuously see it in decks where it doesn't actually do anything. And so people are just trading 2 cards for 5 damage, go again, or trading 2 cards for 7 damage. That means that they have to take a bunch of damage because they can't block with enough cards, or they wouldn't be able to do anything, because Lightning Strike takes 2 cards, and they refuse to block with Lightning Strike because it's this powerful card, right? So I'm seeing that card over and over in decks where it really doesn't help you achieve the goal. It was a card that was really important in set 1 and almost everything, just because we didn't have enough cards to to create the perfect combo scenario, in each deck. So it was a great filler card, and it was very, decently powerful. Whereas now I think there's a lot more cards that can go more towards your game plan.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not to say that Nine Strike's bad. It's stuff like a
No,
warrior deck.
no,
You're
no,
gonna play. You're gonna play Nine Strike. That card's fantastic.
Great and warrior, yeah.
But just in every deck, it's just not as great of a choice. And it just gets into another topic of people still play their set one amalgam decks where they just play cards that they like, and then they've just added new cards, but they still play these cards that don't have any synergies or anything, even in set three. So decks that play 20 defense reacts, or even Sigil of Solace, still cards that don't synergize with your deck, and they're kind of just filler cards because your deck didn't have enough cards to play the full 80 optimally.
Yeah, so Sigil of Solace is another great example of that. Another good example of that's actually Sink Below and Fate Foreseen. Those cards are very good when they're good, and they're good for specific things. But I just see so many people just throw 6 into every deck, and they just play them in most matchups, and they don't synergize with what the deck's trying to do. It keeps kind of messing with their big setup turns and stuff, and so I think one really big bit of advice for people is to not just play your deck as it is and as how everybody else is playing it. You need to really sit down, lay everything out, and think about, why am I playing this card? What does it do for me, and what matchup is it important in, and what's my strategy in that matchup? Am I trying to set up big turns? Am I trying to grind and go long with them? How am I approaching that matchup, and how does this specific card help me achieve those goals? So I think that's kind of probably the biggest piece of advice that we can give to anybody right now is everybody back to the drawing board, look at all of the cards in your deck, figure out what they're for, figure out what their role are. What their roles are.
If you're an aggressive deck, you're not going to play a Sink in most matchups, right? Because you're just trying to push through damage. And this is why Dash is so immensely powerful, because people still don't have consistent enough decks, whereas this Dash deck is completely consistent. Every hand does what it's supposed to do, whereas these decks, they have a certain strategy, but then they draw stuff like Sink Below in their hand and just another card, or Remembrance in their hand, and they're meant to be playing aggressively, and they just end their turn with not much damage, and then the tempo is swung completely.
Yeah, so absolutely, you can have Sink Belows and stuff like that in your sideboard, so you can transform what you're trying to do and change up to being a bit of a mid-rangey strategy where you're not, all set up and all aggression or anything like that. But that has to be the plan that you're playing. I see too many people that are still taking on the role of the aggressor in a specific matchup, and they're just trying to push through damage and go, but then they're still having Sink Belows and Sigils in their deck, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything that you've thought that you want to get into that you've seen? Because you played, I've only played against you. I don't know if you were playing at nationals, you were playing a lot of events. Anything mistakes that you see people making against you specifically?
So I think the biggest mistakes is people understanding their role and people understanding when to pivot to a certain or when to change their role. So the thing that I'm seeing over and over and over again, probably more than 90% of my opponents, is that they're sort of just playing the 4 and 5 card hands that they're dealt every turn, and they're not really focusing on a specific strategy or a specific role in the game, and they're not figuring out when to pivot over to a different role. So I think, I think people aren't really thinking about the strategy of the game enough yet. People are playing it like roulette rather than like chess, I guess. They're like, all right, the cards dealt me this, so I get to do this. I got this lucky great hand, I get to go crazy with it, or I didn't get a lucky great hand, whatever. Whereas I think the way that people are going to be able to level up a bit more is if they focus more on the strategy of throughout the game and how they have to kind of pivot and get through. And that's specifically why Dash is doing well. Dash, for anybody that played Magic, is very, very similar to Jund. It's a very mid-range deck that constantly puts on pressure that, to try to stop your opponent from doing these big things. But if you take a bit of damage from them and set up a big scape shift combo, you're just going to kill them. Nick's not going to have any idea what I'm talking about here, but some people will. I think that people are not playing against it as a mid-range deck yet. So people are not identifying that they're playing against a mid-range deck that's not really going to be able to do anything super crazy powerful against you, unless they're in that high octane, got to go fast thing, whatever, because you're a matchup that they have to race. And people aren't really constructing around that just yet.
You say the word pivot, which people might not really get what you're referring to with that. So what you want to explain when you want to pivot, or what pivoting is, and when should someone do that?
Yeah, so I guess an example of that would be in my finals match against John. There was a turn where I was ahead, and I'd set up some chambers. I'd set up 2 chambers and 2 plasma purifiers, and I was still ahead on life. It was crazy. I was a very, very fortunate position I was in. But then he attacked in, and all of a sudden I made this decision, which I think completely baffled almost everybody that was watching, where I took 17 damage one turn. I think people are far too scared to do that. So I played out the early game there, blocking a lot of his turns and slowly setting up my game plan and charging up my things and just passing and playing a real sort of control-y game plan where I try to just not take too much damage from him while I set up. Then when I got set up, I had the counters on all my stuff. I had my purifiers charged up, an induction chamber charged, or something like that. And I had an unmovable in hand and 3 blues, and I sat there and let him just throw everything at me, even holding an unmovable. What that allowed me to do was that allowed me to pivot my position from being, from sitting there and setting up and trying to minimize the damage I was taking, to all of a sudden moving over to the aggressor that's going to force him to block soon. So what that allowed me to do was it allowed me to, shoot him with plasmas and induction chambers with my 3 blues, and still leave them charged up mostly at the end of turn, and then put an unmovable in my arsenal, which means next turn, even though he's got 5 cards and he's got a counter on his Dawnblade, and I've still got my equipment, so I'm going to be able to do a block turn that just completely shuts him down, and then still leaves me with enough cards to continue to deal 12 again and have some things charged. And then so I think he was on 24, I took 17 down to 12, but over the next 3 turns I'm going to be attacking him for 36 damage, 12 12 12, and I'm going to have an unmovable to stop him along the way as well. So that's the point in the game where I realize I can pivot from being this control, take damage, sort of play safe deck, to all of a sudden take a bunch of damage, spend 3 turns, putting his life total down to the point where he has to block me because he's not on 36. He can't take 36 over 3 turns, and basically completely change the rhythm of the game to something where he's having to block with some number of cards every turn, and I'm never having to play against 5-card hands again. So, yeah.
Well, that's no better example than that, right? Championship winning example for people. And this just leads into another thing that I've seen people do when I've been to locals a couple of times, but people use cards because they have them. They don't just, so with cards like Unmovable,
exactly.
That's the prime example, because people will pick, your opponent will threaten some damage, and they'll just throw an Unmovable at it with no setup and no reason, just because, well, this defends for 8 and it's just gonna do so much better. And then, and then on your turn you have no real pressure on them. Whereas people don't just throw cards from their hand away, which don't really do anything. Instead of with unmovable, instead of using the unmovable just because you can use it and it's an opportunity to use it whenever, just use cards from your hand if you're not going to be able to do anything with them. Unmovable is such a great, powerful card to change the tides of the game that, it's just, it's pretty simple, but people just use their cards because they have them, especially with stuff like defense reacts. That's usually the main culprit of getting trapped in using all your cards because you can.
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying is not exactly spot on. It's not that simple, but it does become very simple if you start thinking about it. But yeah, unmovable is the perfect example there of, it blocks for 8. My opponent's pressuring me with something very big here. I just obviously block it, and then I've got these 2 cards left, so I use these as resources and shoot them, or use these to attack them or whatever, and then we go to the next turn, and then we go to the next turn. But what people aren't, what I think people haven't quite figured out about the game yet is that it's not, the game's not one turn at a time games. If you use up your unmovable there, all of a sudden you can be caught the following turn after you've done, just a little bit of damage that they could just take, and you've let them have a 5-card hand again. And then the following turn you don't have an unmovable or something, and then they walk all over you and they snowball the game from there, and you can never really get it back again.
Yeah. And going on about these using your cards correctly, so at Nationals, you were doing something that no other Dash player did, which is simple in theory, right? Instead of people putting counters on their gun and then shooting and removing their counters and then ending their turn with no counters, you were putting your counters. You always having your turn end with all counters on the field, and then replacing them as the game went on, instead of just using all of them and then having to reload the next turn. Why is that?
Yeah, so I think, it's definitely a different sort of strategy to what other people have kind of figured out yet, which is interesting, because when we started doing it, it became quite obvious. So it is something that it's purely mathematics, to be honest. Like, the fact, I think people that have been playing Dash have generally been playing it for a while, or they've just picked it up. Both scenarios are becoming a negative if they're not realizing. So people that play Dash in set 2, road to Nationals and locals then and such, it was generally right to just continuously shoot your opponent with whatever resources that you had, because that was the easiest way to keep pushing damage. Whereas now we got a card called Plasma Purifier, which changes up all of the math. So people that have been playing Dash for a while just kept playing Dash the way they were, and people that have picked it up for the first time see other known Dash players playing that way, so they just kind of followed suit. If you're attacking people for 4, 3 times by using Plasma Purifier, you're turning 7 resources or something into 12 damage over a couple of turns, rather than just shooting a couple of times each turn for sort of 4 or 6 damage. So if you just think about it and work out the maths, it's just right mathematically to kind of combo though, or kind of save up those resources to do it all at once, so that you get more damage for your money. And then the second thing is that if you just shoot people each turn, they get to just trade the worst card in their hand for life. Whereas if you save it up and you do it all on sort of one turn, where they're going to have to block with multiple cards to stop it, they first trade the worst card in that hand, but then they have to trade the second worst card and then the third worst card or whatever, if they want to trade these cards for life. So instead of you making them trade the worst card each turn of 3 turns in their hand, you're making them trade the 3 better cards in 1 turn.
Yeah. It also takes away the unknown. So you don't know what your opponent's going to do. So if you've always got counters on your thing, you have a lot of cards in your hand to block whatever threat that they make, and then you can use your combo. Whereas if you always end with nothing, you're always going to get caught with your pants down, right? Because you don't have any resources stored up, and now you're on defensive. You're blocking with all your hand, and you can never get anything going. So that's another reason why it's good.
Yeah, and also specifically because you're a high octane deck, if you're playing
Yeah.
high octane in the matchup, having counters on your purifiers all the time is going to pay so many more dividends on the turn that you high octane.
Yeah, that's the best part.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the craziest parts, is because if your purifiers always have counters on them, then the turn that you go and you do your high octane, you've saved 2 resources, which is probably another boost, which is also another action point, which is, like the things just add up to craziness, which, allows you to deal so much more damage.
Yeah, and it's not something that you learn instantly, right? Even Matt didn't learn any of these things until what, 2 weeks before nationals, where it's just like, oh well, crazy. This is crazy. I'm losing because we test a lot, right? And Matt would get these octane turns off, and I'd still end up getting a win. And he just can't figure out why.
Yeah.
It's happened. It's not like I'm gonna say, oh yeah, well I'm the greatest, but it's just knowing, oh well, my octanes didn't do anything. He just threw his hand away, and my octane, I used all these resources to build up my thing. He threw his hand, and now I don't have octane. Nothing happened. It's kind of just it goes back to the whole using your cards properly. Don't just use them because you have them.
Yeah.
So anything else that you're thinking of right now that people would want to know about?
So I think the biggest thing is playing against certain decks. So I touched on it a lot before when I was talking about you need to figure out how you're going to win the game and what your strategy is going to be throughout the game versus what their strategy is, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact that a lot of people are just kind of playing the whatever 5-card hands they get dealt, roulette, I got this number, whatever. So I think one of the biggest things is finding ways to combo your turns together to do something bigger than your opponent's doing. So this is a specific strategy or a way to play against Dash, which we sort of realized in testing, but nobody's really been playing that way against me in tournaments. I was in testing right up to nationals. I was losing a decent amount and being quite worried about the deck choice in a small way for nationals, that I was going to lose to people doing these things. And you kept saying to me, like, you're not playing against me at nationals. People, that people aren't doing this, and that is kind of right. Is that ninja decks specifically, decks that can get an energy pot into play and like set up these sort of big turns that you can't possibly stop. People just aren't playing that way. They're just playing with their 5 cards, and you're able to stop that, and then you deal them a bit of damage, and they do it again, and you're able to stop it again. You deal them a bit of damage, and the game goes on and on and on like that over and over. If games play out like that, mid-range Jund, mid-range Dash is going to win every single time, like just every time. Like you're never, ever, ever going to beat Dash if you just play the game out like that. So the biggest thing that I'm not really seeing people doing too much is setting up against Dash. So what Dash does is they're a deck that doesn't have very many crazy turns. They're a deck that you can use your life as a resource against, and you can set up these big turns that are almost impossible for them to stop, and then you can use that momentum to just crush them. That's the biggest thing that I'm not seeing, is people aren't putting together these strategies or working towards these specific 5-card hands that are going to go over the top of what Dash is going to be able to block, and then using that momentum to just keep Dash on the back foot and destroy them before they're properly set up, and they just lose. Like
an example of this, so we're testing Warrior a lot. People are doing their Iron Song Determination Supremacy combo, which isn't enough to get you to where you want to be. So what we did was we were just slowly grinding them out, Flock of the Featherwalker, force cards out of the hand, and then every time we're just playing Energy Pot and we're playing Strength Pot, which is a card not a lot of people are playing right now.
Good setup. Great setup.
Strength Pot is a very powerful card in the game that people should really look at, especially in a Warrior deck, because stuff like Hit and Run, if you have an Energy Pot, if you have a Strength Pot up and you Hit and Run, now there's a Commander Conquer that's super threatening because it's going to be 8 damage. And then your opponent's put in a tough spot where they're always going to say, well, I can't block with 2 cards because then it's going to Commander Conquer and I'm going to lose my arsenal. Or I can't block with 1 card because then it's going to go over the top of me. It's just these mental games that people are playing, whereas people now play these linear things where people have already figured out, oh, they're just going to play Determination at the bottom, they're going to stack their deck, and then it's just, oh, I'm just going to sit on Unmovable then, and they just lose. So whatever.
Yeah,
You go.
Yeah, certainly in testing, I found it very hard to beat you on Warrior when you were playing this way, playing my dash deck, and that was making me a little bit scared for nationals as well. Is that you talk about strength pot with threatening with command and stuff, but also like even testing with Jacob when I explained this to him and what Warrior has to do, and Jacob doesn't play much Warrior. He's not a very confident Warrior player, but when I explained the strategy and how you're supposed to try to beat Dash, he was doing it, and we would get to the late game. He'd have a strength pot and an energy pot in play. He'd do a supremacy turn that I just could not possibly stop. Like he'd have 5 cards and there'd be no way for me to stop it. It would get through. All of a sudden I'd be taking absurd amounts of damage. He'd counter up. He'd be, he'd finish with an arsenal as well. And, because of supremacy after, eating most of my hand and be able to just snowball the game. And he was just crushing me. That's certainly how we found that when you play that way versus Dash, you can absolutely slaughter them.
Yeah, for sure.
Viserai, Warrior, Ninja, like so many decks can play this way. But
Kano can too. Kano.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Kano. I mean, almost all of the decks can play this way if they choose to, and this way does destroy dash decks. Just nobody's doing it.
Yeah, they're just thinking of other cards. Just even if you don't have to follow the grain, you can just find out your own things. I saw the Brute deck that played Art of War and stuff that no one was even considering, and it did pretty well. So it just think about how you want to end the game. Dash cannot do any one thing the best.
Yeah, it's purely mid-range. It's purely middle of the thing. I think we're going to get to a point probably soon once people start figuring out how to play where Dash doesn't win tournaments. Because if people know how to beat it, they're going to beat it every time. And if people don't know how to beat it, they're going to lose to it every time. And that's exactly what we've been experiencing. Yeah,
for sure. It just fully set up in the late game combo, or just be fully aggressive and just go in, make them use cards. It's just they can't beat the pressure. They only have so many unmovables, right? And if you can go wide, like that's why Ninja's so important, so strong, because they have all these starter cards that just go wide, and it's just super hard to get through. But
I mean, the only, I was really struggling in testing versus our Ninja deck. I was way under 50% against it, but the simple thing is nobody was playing that. Everybody was playing these Ninja decks that have the cards that don't properly synergize, and so they just weren't putting on the same amount of pressure. They couldn't be as consistent.
Here's a question from other questions. Just people might want to know, what's your 1 to 8 hero rankings?
Okay. This I still think Dorinthia is number 1. I think Warrior is very strong. I think in the current meta game, or the current way things are, Dash has to be number 2. Putting Dash at anything other than number 2 is kind of a disservice to how well it's done. But realistically, I think that we're going to get to a time not too far away where that moves further down the chart. I think Katsu is number 3. Oh, I should have written this down. I'm thinking, the top 4 decks are sort of Dorinthia, Dash, Katsu, and then probably Bravo. Bravo is very powerful against most of the strategies. If you know the deck really well, if you understand your roles, you understand the strategies, and you understand how to pivot, Bravo is a very, very strong deck. And then after that, what do we got? Brute's definitely next in line, I think. Brute's got some really powerful things, but it is a very swingy deck. So it's not a consistent deck. It's not something that you can take to a tournament and say, I'm very confident I'm going to win this tournament, just because of the swingy nature of the deck. And then that kind of just leaves the final 3, Ranger, Wizard, and Viserai, unfortunately, the set 2 heroes. So I think Viserai is next in line, then Wizard, then Ranger's just not a competitive deck.
That's not to say that the Viserai and Kano are bad. Or these decks are quite good. I mean, I'm testing Kano myself and I'm having great results. So it's not to say that these decks are horrible. Just at the current time, they're just not figured out as much.
I think all of the decks except for Ranger, you can absolutely take to a tournament and have it and have a really good chance of winning if you know how. If you go to the tournament with a good plan, if you know how you're winning the games, and you've got a refined list, you're fine. The decks are close enough to each other, and they all kind of have their weaknesses and their strengths against each other as well. So yeah, I think. Everything's pretty close. It just depends on the metagame. My rankings are pretty much more specific to how the metagame's looking at the moment and how I feel is going to be the most consistent in this metagame.
All right, here's a question for you. You are very consistent, and so how are you very consistent?
Oh, I mean, I don't really. I've got a great testing partner. Like I put the time in, I put the work in, and I'm very dedicated to bettering my game. So I'm constantly between my testing team, between Nick, Jacob, and I, we're constantly asking each other questions. We're constantly, we're not just accepting that a matchup is the way it is or this game plan is what it is. We're constantly kind of reviewing and analyzing. I think that the biggest thing to my consistency is literally that I've just figured out how to place each of the different roles very well, while most people haven't even figured out that the roles exist necessarily. You know what I mean? So I think the key to my consistency is I'm playing a deck that doesn't really have off turns and real bad draws, anything like that. So I'm playing a consistent deck, and I'm thinking about things, and I'm finding ways to win games when I'm behind through understanding how to pivot my positions and understanding how I'm supposed to win the game. So every time I'm getting behind in a game, I'm figuring out a way to get ahead before my opponent's figuring out a way to kill me.
Yep. Well, there you go. That's how you people do it. And it's also, you're only as good as your testing team, right? Or the people you play against. So obviously you play against your friends and better each other, but always try and get games against people that are better than you.
Yeah.
That's the best way to learn. Always play against people that are better than you. And obviously there's always going to be someone better than you. So there's always someone
losing is great. Lose a lot.
From. And winning, you don't learn that much from winning because you don't ever analyze your wins. People always complain about their losses, but they never even think about their wins, right? So always play against people better than you. You obviously notice your mistakes a lot more against people that can punish you, which is always great, right?
So, okay, we're getting to the last few seconds now, so we do need to wrap this up. The recording's about to stop. But thanks again for everybody for tuning in, and feel free to ask us questions if there's things we didn't cover. We'll try to cover them. All right. We'll try to respond. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Hope you learned something.
Bye.
Session Blood.